He's resisting! Taser! 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 The words, sharp and laced with a venomous impatience, sliced through the humid afternoon air before the crackle and thud. An old man, his eyes unseeing, crumpled to the grimy sidewalk, a low groan escaping his lips. He'd only asked for directions. He'd only been trying to find his way. The officer, young and brash, his uniform crisp in stark contrast to the veteran's worn coat, stood over him, hand still on the deployed weapon. The world for Arthur Jenkins, already a canvas of muted sounds and tactile sensations, had just exploded into a universe of pain and confusion. The scent of ozone and cheap coffee from a nearby diner filled his nostrils, a bizarre perfume for his humiliation. If you believe that every soul carries a story deserving of respect, comment honor below, because what happened next would shake. This street to its core, Arthur Jenkins had walked through hellfire and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. His blindness was a memento from a land of sand and shadows, a place where he'd led men, saved lives, and sacrificed a part of himself so others could live whole. Now, in his late 60s, he navigated a different kind of battlefield, the bustling, often indifferent streets of a city he was still learning. His pension was modest, his apartment small, but his spirit, though quiet, retained the steel forged in the crucibles of duty. Today he was attempting to find a small community center. For veterans, a new place he'd heard about, a place where perhaps he could find a little camaraderie. His white cane, usually a reliable extension of his senses, tapped hesitantly on the unfamiliar pavement. He was acutely aware of the city's symphony around him, the rumble of buses, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant wail of a siren, but the specific melody of his destination eluded him. By all outward accounts, he looked like just another elderly man, perhaps a little lost, perhaps a little down on his luck. The faded fabric of his jacket and the slight tremor in his hand spoke of age and hardship, not of the lion's heart that beat within his chest. The sun beat down, and Arthur felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. He paused near what smelled like a bakery, the sweet scent of yeast and sugar a momentary comfort. He could hear the hurried footsteps of many people, the impatient honk of a car horn. He needed to ask someone. Turning his head towards the general flow of sound, he raised his voice slightly. "Excuse me, could anyone help me? I'm looking for the Veteran Support Center on Elm Street." His voice was polite, tinged with the soft drawl of his southern upbringing. Most footsteps hurried past, a river of indifference. Then a gruff voice, too close. "What's the problem here, old man?" Arthur sensed a figure stopping directly in front of him. "Officer," Arthur said, relief in his tone. "Thank goodness. I'm a bit turned around. I'm trying to find the Veteran Support Center. I believe it's near Elm Street." He offered a small, hopeful smile. Officer Miller, badge number 347, barely into his late 20s, scanned Arthur up and down, worn clothes, slightly disheveled, blind. To Miller, fresh from an argument with his dispatcher and simmering with a general sense of aggravation, Arthur fit a profile. Vagrant, nuisance. "Elm Street's 3 blocks east. Now move along. You're blocking the sidewalk," Miller snapped, his tone dismissive. Arthur's smile faltered. "Oh, I see. Could you perhaps be a little more specific, officer? East is a bit general for me, you see." He gestured subtly to his eyes. Miller's patience, already thin, snapped. "What, you deaf too?" I said, "Move it, or do you want me to help?" "You move?" "No, officer, not deaf," Arthur replied, his voice still calm, though a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. "I'm visually impaired, blind actually. That's why I need more precise directions. Perhaps a landmark, or how many intersections—" He tried to explain, to bridge the gap of understanding he felt widening between them. Miller scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Blind, huh? Convenient. Got any ID, pal, or are you blind to that too?" This sarcasm was a physical blow. Arthur sighed softly. He was used to ignorance, but not usually such overt hostility from someone sworn to protect and serve. "Yes, officer, I have ID. It's in my wallet. He began to reach slowly toward his inner jacket. Pocket, his movements careful and deliberate, as they always were. He knew sudden movements could be misinterpreted, especially when someone couldn't see your eyes, your intentions. But Miller, his mind already made up, saw not caution, but stalling. He saw not a blind man retrieving identification, but a potential threat, a vagrant reaching for who knows what. "Hold it! Hands where I can see 'em," Miller barked, his hand instinctively going to the taser on his belt. "I'm just getting my wallet, officer," Arthur said, his voice laced with a weariness that went far beyond his physical age. "It's in my pocket. I have a disabled veteran's card." The mention of veteran didn't even register with Miller. All he saw was defiance. "I'm tired of this. You're loitering. You're not complying. One more wrong move, old man, and you'll regret it. I'll light you up." The threat hung heavy in the air, thick with menace. Arthur froze, his hand halfway to his pocket. "Officer, please," he pleaded, his voice now strained. "There's no need for this. I assure you, I'm no threat. I'm just lost. My name is Arthur Jenkins. I served this country for 30 years. He hoped, prayed, that invoking his service might pierce through the officer's aggressive stance. But to Miller, it sounded like a desperate, pathetic lie, the kind he'd heard 100 times from street drifters trying to curry sympathy or avoid a charge. "Save your stories, Grandpa," Miller sneered, his finger twitching on the taser's trigger. He took a step closer, invading Arthur's already compromised personal space. The scent of Miller's cheap aftershave was cloying, suffocating. "You're a public nuisance. Last chance. Get your hands up and turn around, or I'll take you down." Arthur felt a surge of adrenaline, not of aggression, but of profound, helpless despair. How had it come to this? A simple request for directions escalating into a physical threat. "I can't see to turn around easily, officer," Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly now. "If you just let me get my ID—" But Miller wasn't listening. He saw only defiance in Arthur's stillness, insolence in his continued attempts to speak. "That's it. You asked for it," Miller shouted. The distinct, terrifying zap of the taser deploying was the last thing Arthur heard clearly before an agonizing, incapacitating wave of electricity seized his body. He cried out, a sharp, strangled sound, as his muscles locked and he pitched forward, his white cane clattering uselessly beside him on the hard concrete. He landed heavily, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. Pain, white-hot and blinding, even to his unseeing eyes, seared through every nerve. For a moment the world was nothing but that excruciating artificial lightning. Arthur lay gasping on the sidewalk, the rough concrete scraping his cheek. The ghost of the electrical current still danced mockingly under his skin. He could hear Miller muttering into his radio, something about a combative subject now secured. Secured? Arthur thought dimly. He was a blind old man, tasered for asking for help. Around him, the sounds of the street seemed to recede, then rushed back in. A woman gasped, someone else tutted disapprovingly, but from a safe distance. No one intervened. The metallic tang of blood filled his mouth from a bitten lip. He fought through the waves of pain and disorientation. His training, buried deep but never gone, kicked in. Survive, adapt, overcome. His hand, shaking violently, fumbled for the inside pocket of his old jacket. Miller, seeing the movement, barked, "Stay down! Don't even think about it!" But Arthur wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was reaching for his lifeline, a battered pre-smartphone era cell phone, simple with large tactile buttons. His fingers, clumsy from the aftershocks of the taser, found the familiar raised dot on the number 5, then slid to the pre-programmed speed dial for the one number he knew would always answer. It was a long shot. It had been years, but some bonds were forged in fire, bonds that time could not erode. He pressed the button, holding the phone to his ear with a trembling hand. 1 ring, 2. He could hear Miller still on the radio, requesting a transport van. "Yeah, got a vagrant here." Resisted. Claims he's blind but was reaching for something. The contempt in Miller's voice was a fresh stab of pain. Then, A click on the line. A gruff, familiar voice. "Thorne!" Just one word. Arthur's breath hitched. "Commander, it's Jenkins. Arthur Jenkins. I need help." His voice was weak, raspy. There was a pause. A silence so profound Arthur feared the connection had dropped. Then, Thorne's voice, sharper now, laced with an unmistakable urgency. "Arthur, what's your 20? What's wrong?" Arthur, struggling to focus, managed to describe his surroundings based on what he'd heard and smelled before the incident. Corner of, I think, 5th, and there was a bakery. A loud bus stop. It was all he could manage. "Stay on the line, Arthur." "We're coming." The line went dead. Arthur let the phone drop. 6 minutes. That's what it usually took in the old days for Thorne's unit to mobilize. 6 minutes. It felt like an eternity. Officer Miller swaggered slightly as he clicked off his radio. Backup was on its way. He glanced down at Arthur, still prone. Achai, small, pathetic heap on the sidewalk. "Should have just listened, old man," Miller said, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "Would have saved us both a lot of trouble." He nudged Arthur's leg with the toe of his polished boot. "Get ready for a nice ride downtown." Other officers began to arrive, their cruisers pulling up with varying degrees of urgency. 2 more uniformed cops, Officers Davis and Chen, ambled over. "What's the excitement, Miller?" Davis asked, chewing gum lazily. "Just this bum," Miller gestured dismissively. "Causing a disturbance. Resisted. Had to light him up." Chen, a younger officer, looked at Arthur with a flicker of something. Pity, perhaps, or discomfort, but quickly masked it. The prevailing culture was to back your fellow officer. No questions asked. In public. "Claims he's blind." "And a veteran," Miller added with a snort. "Heard that one before." Minutes ticked by. The requested transport van was late. Arthur lay still, conserving his energy, his mind replaying Thorne's voice. "We're coming." It was a promise. A lifeline. He focused on his breathing, trying to control the tremors that still racked his frame. The small crowd of onlookers had grown slightly, their faces a mixture of curiosity, fear, and morbid fascination. Suddenly, a different sound cut through the urban cacophony. Not a siren, but a deeper, more resonant rumble, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate up from the pavement itself. Heads began to turn. Even Miller paused in his recounting of Arthur's resistance to his colleagues. 3 sleek black SUVs, devoid of any official markings but radiating an unmistakable aura of serious business, turned the corner onto 5th Street, moving with a quiet, menacing efficiency. They didn't slow for traffic. Traffic parted for them, as if by an invisible force. The SUVs pulled to a halt with precision, forming a loose protective cordon around the scene, their tinted windows reflecting the stunned faces of the local police. Doors opened in unison, and out stepped men who moved with a coiled, predatory grace. They were not in police uniform. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, dark shirts, boots, but their bearing, their focused intensity, and the subtle bulges under their jackets screamed elite training. They fanned out, their eyes scanning, assessing, missing nothing. Officer Miller and his colleagues froze, their casual demeanor evaporating like mist in a desert wind. These were not backup. These were something else entirely. The passenger door of the lead SUV opened, and a man emerged who was clearly in command. He was tall, lean, with silver hair cropped short and eyes like chips of ice. He wore a tailored jacket that did little to conceal the powerful physique beneath. This was Commander Marcus Thorne, retired Navy SEAL, now head of a highly specialized, very private security and rapid response unit comprised almost entirely of ex-Special Forces operators. His gaze swept the scene, cold and appraising, until it landed on the figure of Arthur Jenkins, still lying on the sidewalk. Thorne's face, already stern, hardened into a mask of controlled fury. He moved toward Arthur, his steps measured, each one resonating with an authority that dwarfed every uniformed officer present. The other operators moved with him, A silent, formidable flank. Miller, suddenly feeling very small and very exposed, managed to stammer, "Sir, this is a police matter. This man assaulted an officer." Thorne didn't even glance at him. He knelt beside Arthur. "Arthur," he said, his voice, though low, cutting through the sudden silence. "It's Marcus. We're here." Arthur's head turned slightly. A faint sound, half sob, half sigh of relief, escaped his lips. "Marcus, knew you'd come." Commander Thorne gently placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Easy, old friend. We'll get you sorted." He then rose to his full height, turning to face Officer Miller, who now looked like a rabbit caught in the glare of a wolf pack. Thorne's voice was deceptively calm, yet it carried the lethal chill of an Arctic wind. "Officer," he began, his eyes boring into Miller, "you tased this man. You accused him of assault." Miller, emboldened by the presence of his sergeant, who had just arrived and was looking utterly bewildered, puffed out his chest slightly. "Yes, sir." He was non-compliant and aggressive. He resisted. "Resisted?" Thorne cut him off, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "This man is Master Chief Petty Officer Arthur Jenkins, United States Navy SEAL, retired. He is the recipient of the Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars and 3 Purple Hearts, the last of which cost him his sight when he shielded 3 of his men, my men, from a grenade blast in Kandahar. He has served this nation with more honor and courage in one day than you will likely demonstrate in your entire lifetime, and you accuse him of aggression?" Thorne's words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow. Miller's face drained of all color, his jaw slack. The sergeant standing beside him looked horrified, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared from Thorne to Arthur, then back to Thorne. The other officers shuffled their feet, suddenly finding the pavement intensely interesting. One of Thorne's men, a medic, was already by Arthur's side, checking his vitals, his touch gentle but efficient. "Master Chief Jenkins," Thorne continued, his voice resonating with a profound respect that shamed every sneer Arthur had endured, "is a hero. He is blind because of his service. He was asking for directions, and your response was to electrocute him and leave him lying on the pavement like refuse." Thorne took a deliberate step closer to Miller. "What you call resistance, officer, I call a decorated warrior, a man who has faced down death itself, trying to navigate a world he can know, longer see, being abused by someone who clearly judges a book by its tattered cover." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant city sounds, which now seemed to fade into an insignificant hum. The entire street seemed to be holding its breath. The medic helped Arthur to sit up, then to his feet, supporting him carefully. Another SEAL draped a warm blanket over Arthur's shoulders. The respect they showed him was a stark, painful contrast to the contempt he'd received from Miller. Commander Thorne didn't take his eyes off the rapidly paling Officer Miller and his equally stunned sergeant. "Sergeant," Thorne addressed the ranking local officer, his voice now like iron, "I expect a full and thorough investigation into this incident. I expect Officer Miller to be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of that investigation, and I expect to be personally briefed on its progress." The sergeant, a man named Henderson, who had seen his share of tough situations but nothing like this, nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. I am so sorry, Master Chief Jenkins." He turned to Arthur, his face etched with genuine remorse and embarrassment. "There's no excuse for this." Miller, meanwhile, looked like he was about to be sick. His arrogance had shattered, replaced by a dawning, terrifying understanding of the magnitude of his misjudgment. He opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to defend himself. But Thorne cut him off with a look that could freeze fire. "You will speak when spoken to, officer." Thorne then turned back to Arthur, his expression softening considerably. "Arthur, we'll get you to a hospital, get you checked out properly. Then you're coming with me. You'll stay with me until we find you a more suitable place, somewhere you feel safe and respected." Arthur managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Marcus. You always did know how to make an entrance." Despite the pain, the humiliation, a spark of his old self flickered. He straightened slightly, the blanket lending him a regal air. He didn't look at Miller. His vindication was complete, not in seeing Miller's fear, but in the unwavering loyalty and respect of his brothers in arms. The system, Thorne had assured, would deal with Miller. For Arthur, the more important justice was already being served, the affirmation of his worth, his service, his inherent dignity as a human being. The paramedics, who had arrived amidst the silent standoff, were now conferring quietly with Thorne's medic. Their usual confident demeanor was somewhat subdued in the presence of the SEALs. Officer Miller was being discreetly but firmly guided away by Sergeant Henderson, his career, and certainly his day, in tatters. The crowd of onlookers, sensing the dramatic shift in power and the gravity of the situation, began to disperse, whispering amongst themselves, their expressions a mixture of awe and shock. The story of the blind veteran and the SEALs who came for him would undoubtedly become local legend. Commander Thorne gently guided Arthur toward one of the waiting SUVs. "Let's get you out of here, Artie," he said, using an old nickname. As Arthur was settled comfortably inside, Thorne paused and looked back at the remaining police officers, his gaze sweeping over them. "Remember this day," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "Remember that respect is not earned by a uniform alone, but by the character of the person wearing it. And remember that heroes often walk among us, unseen, unrecognized, until an act of ignorance or cruelty brings their true measure to light." He then got into the SUV, and the convoy pulled away as smoothly and silently as it had arrived, leaving behind a street forever changed by the events of that afternoon. The air, once thick with tension and injustice, now seemed to hold a quiet sense of awe. Arthur Jenkins, tasered and humiliated for asking for directions, was now safe, his dignity restored, surrounded by men who understood the true meaning of sacrifice and brotherhood. Officer Miller would face an internal affairs investigation, his actions scrutinized, his career likely irrevocably damaged. More importantly, a vital lesson had been delivered with undeniable force. Judge no one by their appearance, for the quietest souls may carry the heaviest burdens and the greatest honor. The value of service, the quiet dignity of those who have given much, endures. If you believe that every veteran, every individual deserves to be treated with fundamental respect, subscribe to Hidden Sparks.